Hello, everybody, from a very snowy Utah. The news today is that the world is getting ready to deal with a China shock. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen just got back from a trip to China where she basically spent her time warning the Chinese that if they try to dump product on the international market, they can count on at least the United States establishing a severe tariff regime in order to protect their own industries. The Europeans, specifically the European Commission, are also working on a broad-based system without even needing prodding from their national governments to establish a network of approving what can get in as opposed to what can be kept out. So the scale of what's coming out is very, very real. We were always going to get here, and the issue is, of course, primarily demographic. So in the time between 2019 and 2023, when the Chinese were in a degree of lockdown because of COVID, the numbers in China changed horribly. So we know going back 40 years that the Chinese birth rate has been plunging, but during COVID it just fell off a cliff. And the Chinese are now reporting that their birth rate dropped by about half in just the last 5 or 6 years. You combine that with the previous demographic collapse, and during the COVID period when numbers were kind of scrambled, it turns out that that cohort of people born pre-one-child policy are now in their late 40s and early 50s. And so China's basically lost their ability to regenerate their workforce and in fact regenerate their population. There now are not enough people of childbearing age in the country to even theoretically generate the population that is necessary to carry China into future decades. So we really are in the witching hour here of the Chinese system. From a worker point of view, from a consumption point of view, from an economic point of view, that means that consumption-led growth in China is now fundamentally statistically impossible, and export growth is the only thing that they can do to maintain their economic system. So they have this huge industrial plant, they have had some success in modernizing it, and they're going to be basically just dumping everything they can on any market that will buy. That's what triggers things like Yellen's statement. And keep in mind, until this point, Secretary Yellen, Treasury Secretary, has been the voice in the administration arguing most closely that we shouldn't be too disruptive in our relations with the People's Republic because of the economic and financial outcomes of those policies. And now she's basically sounding like a China hawk. So this is very real, this is very deep, it's driven by structural issues on the Chinese side. So the question is, what happens next? In the United States and Europe, they're now starting to equate the China threat with not just economic security threats, but national security and even environmental threats. And on the Chinese side, there are really no good options. Consumption-led growth is impossible. Investment-led growth has basically peaked and is now a problem. That just leaves the exports. So we know this clash is coming. As the United States and the Europeans block off their industries, the Chinese will be forced to dump their product onto the developing world, which is an area that geopolitically doesn't see China as nearly as hostile. But when they come through and wipe out all the local industries, you should expect that to change pretty damn quickly. So we are at the dawn of the very end of the globalized system, as China is now going to be systematically blocked off from most economic sectors in anything that is especially a medium manufactured good or better, specifically automotive and green tech. After that, it's just a personal preference for each individual country about how much damage they want to do to the Chinese system. This doesn't mean to suggest for a second that this is going to be a smooth process, because if you start to deliberately damage the Chinese industrial base before your own industrial base has spun up to take replacements, then you're going to have some mismatches, some supply chain issues, and some inflation issues, and by some I mean a whole lot that are going to be difficult to adapt to. But I would argue that over the next decade, we were going to get here anyway, because the Chinese system demographically is incapable of survival. So from a certain point of view, front-loading some of these problems in specific industries so that we goose ourselves to build out the industrial plant that we need, the ideal time to do this would have been 10 years ago, but late is better than never.